So the first presenter today on the blue stage is a veteran on the craft stage. He said that for the 6th time he's here with us, and the topic for today will be a little bit different. It will be improving eBay's development velocity. But who is the presenter? Randy Shoup, is coming from San Francisco. He has spent more than 2 decades building distributed systems and high-performing teams, and he was working with eBay, Google, and Stitch Fix as senior technology leader. So please welcome on stage with an amazing applause, Randy Shoup.
Thank you. Great, thanks. It's so fun to be back at Craft. I'm a conference organizer for other conferences. This is my favorite conference. Don't tell my friends. Today I'm going to talk to you about improving eBay's development velocity. So, what's the problem? eBay's a 27-year-old company. I hope lots of you are familiar with it and maybe have used it. But the truth is, in 2022, eBay's product velocity significantly lags the industry leaders. And so the work that I'm talking about that I've came back to eBay 2 years ago to do is to make eBay's product velocity not just okay, but a competitive advantage for the company. So it's challenging because the reasons that the product velocity is slow are manifold. So there are lots of issues that are involved here. It's going to require systemic changes across the company, all types of people, all types of skill sets. And there's really no one single silver bullet. There are going to be a bunch of improvements that we do over time. There's not one thing that will automatically and magically change everything. But the wonderful thing in 2022 is we do have a lot of examples that we can look to. So there are many companies, hopefully you work for some of them, that have already successfully navigated this journey. And so we can learn a lot from our industry peers. So when I returned to eBay about 2 years ago, this was the problem statement, but we didn't really know how we were going to solve it. So I set off to do a sort of assessment. So I talked with a sampling of 3 different teams through eBay, and I looked at how they did their product lifecycle. So, this is the way I tend to view the product development lifecycle. So there's planning in the beginning, which is how does an idea become a project that we work on. There's software development, which is how does that project we start become committed code. There's software delivery. How does that committed code get deployed and released and become a feature on the site? And then, please don't forget this, the post-release iteration. So when it's in production and customers are using it, let's iterate on that with experimentation and analytics and so on. And so we surveyed the whole board here. We looked kind of end-to-end with a systems view at what was going on in the company. And we found issues at every stage, right? So we found, in the planning phase, lots of inter-team coordination, lots of inter-team dependencies, and every team at the company had too much work in progress. In terms of software development, we asked developers and they said, building and testing time is really long. I spend a lot of my time context switching and waiting for other people to do work. We have a pretty highly coupled architecture after 27 years of building software. We don't have a history of doing strong service contracts, so that was an opportunity. And then there's lots of hidden work. So we do feature development up here, but there's lots of hidden work below that feature work that needs to happen in order for the feature work to happen. From a software delivery perspective, there were a bunch of teams that did great with CD pipelines, but there were a bunch of teams and applications that really hadn't used them effectively. We had lots of issues in our staging environment where we could test things before we rolled to production. Lots of manual testing. No fully automated rollout. We've always had automation, but there was always a person, pressing the button to move from stage 1 to stage 2 to stage 3, so not fully automated. We did not have a canary deployment capability, and then we weren't particularly well using feature flags. And then in terms of post-release iteration, we didn't really have good end-to-end monitoring of the user behavior. We have great monitoring on the systems, we know the health of the systems, but we don't have great end-to-end monitoring of the customer behavior. We had lots of issues with, tracking customer behavior in end to end, so we could figure out what people are doing and how we could improve their experience. And then we have what my colleagues and I like to call dysfunctional experimentation, where some teams were experimenting almost too much, like they were afraid to make any forward progress without a very detailed A/B test that they might run for months. And then there were other teams that weren't doing any experimentation at all. So lots of opportunities for improvement, as you can see, but like where to get started, right? Like we're not going to start everywhere at once. So it turns out that every single team was telling us that software delivery, or this kind of confluence of software development and software delivery, was the bottleneck for every one of the teams. And so this is where we have focused for the last 2 years. And the insight there is that by enabling better software delivery at eBay, it makes everything else possible, right? So as the introduction said, maybe it didn't say, I'm chief architect of the company. So one might think that when I would come into the company 2 years ago, that the first thing I would do would be change the architecture. Well, if a particular application or service is only deploying code once a month, you get only 12 bites at the apple, through the year. So it's pretty hard to change architecture in a safe way if you only, can do it 10 or 12 times a year. So software delivery enables all these capabilities to be better. Faster experimentation, uncoupling a bunch of dependencies between teams, et cetera. Anyway, so software delivery is where we decided to focus to enable faster change and to reduce the cost of change. So if software delivery is our bottleneck, let's measure ourselves. Let's figure out what it means to be good at software delivery. Well, again, it's wonderful that this is our problem. It could have been another problem, but now we have lots of industry research associated with this. Who's familiar with this book, Accelerate? Good. Everyone who didn't raise your hand, go out immediately and buy and read this book. So it summarizes now 8 years of industry research, so yearly surveys called the State of DevOps surveys. They started in 2014. They continue through this year, but last year that they produced results was 2021. 31,000 survey responses from developers and teams all over the planet. It's actually the largest software delivery study done ever. And there's hugely rigorous scientific methodology, so when it says that something is true, you really can trust it. And all this research is summarized in this Accelerate book by Dr. Nicole Forsgren, so I really strongly recommend that you check this out. One of the great interesting findings, very non-intuitive findings, is that companies tend to cluster. So there are low performers where they're kind of bad on all the metrics that I'm about to tell you about. There are medium performers that are okay, high performers that are good on all the metrics, and then elite performers that are even better. So the first insight when you look at this is that companies tend to cluster. If you're great at some of the metrics, you're great at all of them. If you are poor on some of the metrics, you're poor at all of them. But the other thing that you might notice is over time, the average company is getting better. Can you see that? Right? So we started with 7%, 4 years ago of these elite performers that are really, really good. You can think that, the Amazons, the Googles, the Netflixes of the world. And then that cohort grew in 2019, so huge growth there. And in 2021, it's growing still. So if you stay where you are, you're actually falling behind. Does it make sense what I'm saying? If the companies stay at their current performance, you fall behind relative to your competitors almost immediately. Okay, so when we say, software delivery performance, and we talk about high performers, low performers, et cetera, what do we even mean? So this comes straight from the State of DevOps research. And it's kind of an eye chart, but I'll walk you through it. So there are 4 key metrics, which we call 4 key metrics, that you can measure software delivery performance. Deployment frequency, how often for a particular application do we deploy new versions to the site. Lead time for change. When a developer commits her code, how long does it take for that to show up, for providing value for customers? Time to restore service. So when we have an issue, how long does it take us to repair and get back to a good customer experience? And then change failure rate. What's the percentage of time when we do one of those deployments that we have to roll it back or hot fix it or something like that? And you can read this at your leisure, but the quick summary is for the low performers, all these things are measured in months. Like they deploy maybe every 1 month or every 2 months or every 3 months. The lead time is measured in months. The time to restore service is measured in months, etc. For the medium performers, all these things are measured in weeks. For the high performers, all these things are measured in days. For the elite performers, all these things are measured in hours. So the difference between the low performers and the high performers is something like 1,000x, right? So the people that are really good at this, the organizations who are really good at this, are moving 1,000 times or more faster than everybody else. Okay, great. Well, thanks, Randy. But where does eBay fit on this? Sure. Thanks for asking. So eBay, on average, is a pretty solid medium performer. So the average application or service on the site, oh no, I should pause. We have about 4,500 applications and services at eBay. We have about 4,000 engineers across the company. So it's a pretty big problem to solve. So on average, we deploy, let's say, twice a month, so once every 2 weeks, any particular application or service. Lead time for change is about 10 days from when a developer commits their code to when it shows up on the site. Time to restore service is, for something that's really major, maybe a day or two sometimes. And then change failure rate we're actually pretty good at, so it's 2%, 3%, something like that, very low. So after the velocity work that I'm about to tell you about, the teams that we work with all moved into the high performer category. So they moved from deploying, twice a month to twice a week. So that was pretty good. Lead time for change moved from 10 days to 2 days. Time to restore service, which we actually were only focused on these speed metrics. So we were only working with teams to improve their deployment cadence and reduce their lead time. But as the research predicted and as happened, we actually also improved the quality metrics of time to restore service and change failure rate. So those also went down. Great. But these are engineering metrics, and okay, that's interesting, but what does that really mean for eBay as a company? Well, so the wonderful result that was really exciting for everybody else at the company is that, again, for those teams that we work with, we were able to double their engineering productivity. What does doubling engineering productivity mean, Randy? Good question. It means holding the team size and the composition constant. In other words, the same exact team. After we've worked with that team and removed a bunch of bottlenecks, et cetera, they were able to deliver twice the number of features and bug fixes that they were able to do before. So this is actually, I'm not going to talk much in detail about this, but this is something called flow velocity. So if you're interested in something called the flow framework, where you actually measure, it's a broader measure of the ability of engineering teams to deliver good work. This is an improvement of flow velocity. So at the end of the day, this is what we're being paid to do as engineering teams, right? It's produce more changes, more good changes for our customers. Okay, so how did we do this? And I'm going to spend most of the talk talking about this. Good. So the main meta idea is to think big, but start small and learn fast. So I'm going to talk in great detail about all the things that we did, all the things that we learned, all the things that we still are challenged by and are still working on. So the first thing was, rather than having a big program where we deal with all 4,000 engineers at once, all 4,500 applications at once, instead we focused on very specific, what we called pilot domains, pilot product teams. And within those product teams, we asked them to tell us, what are your 10, most important applications or services. And so we focused even within those teams on a very specific small subset of applications and services. And then I didn't say this, but I'm on the platform and infrastructure side of the company. And so for my teams, we spent a lot of time building platform capabilities and tools, which I'll talk about in a moment. And our goal here was to drive, back to our problem statement, drive improvements in developer productivity, so they're spending more time doing real work as opposed to waiting for things, improved software delivery, and then also improve our end-to-end instrumentation and monitoring. And we wanted to both deliver short-term wins in a very tight feedback loop, but also long-term capabilities. And again, even though my title is Chief Architect, most of this work is not architectural work, but there are several key areas that we did start re-architecting as part of this project. So the two areas that we focused on are what we call internally the view item page. So if you've ever gone to eBay, it's the product page. It's the place where you look at the item that you want to bid on or buy. It's the place where you do all the stuff that we care about. So that, as you can imagine, that page is very important. Almost every initiative that we do at the company in some way or another touches that page in some way. And over time, it kind of grew to be quite a monolith. And so we spent a lot of effort over the last 2 years re-architecting that page, both modularizing and modernizing that page. And then we spent a bunch of time doing similar work in our mobile apps. So we've had iOS and Android apps for about 15 years, and again, over time they were quite monolithic, and so spending time on modernizing the tools that we use, or the frameworks that we use, and then modularizing subsets of the mobile apps. Okay, so platform tracks and pilot domains. So again, as I mentioned, we started a bunch of platform tracks that were mostly led by my teams. So the very first thing we did is, how can we measure those 4 key metrics for all the applications and services at eBay? So fortunately, we had all the raw data. We just weren't showing it in the kind of accelerate way. So we put together a dashboard, or more precisely, we modified an existing dashboard to show for every team, for every application and service, and then rolled up to teams and rolled up to organizations, what the deployment frequency, lead time, change failure rate, and time to recover was. Hugely valuable, because you could immediately look at that and see where there are opportunities to improve. We talked with a lot of developers about what was slowing them down in their day-to-day work, their build, test, debug cycle, and we tried to work with them. We spent a lot of time hearing from what developers said, improving build time, improving startup time. That made a big difference, immediately. Improvements in developers doing local testing on their laptop. We spent a lot of time improving our continuous integration and our continuous delivery pipelines, improving the reliability of them, the ease of use, etc. We spent a lot of effort improving our staging environment. We introduced a capability that we call traffic mirroring. I don't think there's a standard industry term for this, but we definitely didn't invent this idea. So the idea of a traffic mirror is, in production, we receive a request to some production service. Then we send that exact same request to a new version, a +1 version of that software, and compare the results. And if the results are the same, then we know from the outside, kind of a black box test, that we haven't broken anything about that service. As you can imagine, with 4,500 applications and services, there are a lot of them that don't have a lot of tests. And while we would have liked to have built everything with test-driven development from the beginning, we didn't. And we have to live in that world. And so this is a black box way of verifying that we haven't broken something, even for an application or service that has no tests at all. Does it make sense? Traffic mirroring. I've heard it called shadowing, and I'd actually love if you have heard other terms for this. I'd love to communicate it better. Okay, as I mentioned, lots of improvements around deployment automation. So we did introduce a canary capability where, as you roll things out, if the metrics are good, they keep rolling out, and if the metrics are bad, we automatically roll them back. And then we spent a lot of time with training and workshops trying to improve the capabilities and the skills of our developers. And then for the pilot domains, it's just all across the company, right? So, we work with the selling team, we work with the search team, we work with the payments team and the buying team. So one of the goals of this pilot was to show that improvements over here could make a difference at any point at eBay. Does it make sense? We needed to have a proof point that no matter what team you were in, no matter what kind of software you were building, these tools and capabilities were going to improve your daily life. So that's why we intentionally chose this kind of cross-sectional sampling of all the domains at the company. So how do we work? Because this is actually one of the reasons why I think this has been more successful than previous efforts that failed at eBay in the past. So the first thing is that we did it in a strong collaboration between the platform and infrastructure side, represented by me and my teams, and the product development, or we would say the domain side, represented by my partner in crime, another VP of engineering who is co-running this program with me. So we had cross-functional leadership, not just from the platform side, but also from the domain side. We had what I call an embedding model, or if you know the team topologies idea, an enabling team. So I brought in a couple of pretty senior, individual contributor architect people and sent them out into the provinces, sent them out to the domains and had them embed in those domains and really help the teams get better. And that model worked very, very well. And then every time we built a new platform capability or service, we would always find one or several domain teams that were willing to do a pilot with us. So when we developed the canary capability, when we developed the traffic mirroring capability, when we improved aspects of the CI and CD pipelines, we would have specific pilot teams that had agreed to work with us where we could do tight feedback loops with them and learn to see if the improvements that we made were making a difference. And obviously we learned a lot because we would try something, it would not work as well as we thought, we would get feedback, we would try again, etc. So very tight feedback loop. Lots of communication between and among the teams. So actually, I and my partner in crime do daily leadership stand-ups. We meet every day of the week for half an hour to help unblock each other and help each other out. We have a weekly, what I'll call a team of teams meeting with all the teams that are involved in this work, and people are sharing ideas and wins and challenges, etc. And then we do weekly deep dives with the teams. What are your challenges now? How can we help you more? And then we do a monthly operating review with our executive team. In terms of measurement, like I mentioned, we built this dashboard that has the 4 key metrics. And you can also, in our deployment, in our CD and deployment tooling, you can keep drilling in and drilling in and drilling in and see where all the time is being spent. So that's hugely helpful for teams kind of debugging the process that they're working on. And then for each one of those platform tracks that I mentioned, we had input metrics. So we had like, what's our goal for build time improvements? What's our goal for startup time improvements? What's our goal for end-to-end testing? How long should it take for a PR to be validated, et cetera, that kind of thing. And then we constantly iterating, like I'm mentioning. So we would do this exercise or this kata with teams. We would say, hi, it looks like you're deploying, once a month or twice a month. If I told you you had to deploy your software every day, tell me all the reasons why you can't. And you can imagine the teams are like, oh my gosh, here's a list of 20. How long do you have, Randy? And build time is too slow. The staging environment isn't any good. Our tests are flaky. The deployment tooling keeps failing. Tick, 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 tick. And in the past, when teams had raised those kind of issues, my predecessors on the platform side said, yeah, but it's working. It's working as intended, and quit complaining, which isn't very helpful. And so the team stopped, complaining about it. They stopped giving the feedback. So instead, in this situation, when teams gave us their kind of list of complaints, we said, great, you just gave us our backlog. You just gave us our backlog. Everything you say, and then we asked a bunch of teams, and then we kind of merge sorted them, and we figured out, what were the bottlenecks that, if we removed those, we would unblock most of the teams, and then we just kept working in priority order on improving those. And these kind of improvement cycles come from, there's a long history, 100-year history of doing this. It's something called plan, do, check, act. You plan something, you have some idea, you think that it might make an improvement, you try an experiment, that's the do part, you check to see if it worked, and then if it did, you roll it out more broadly, and if it didn't, you try something else. And then finally, again, as I mentioned, there's a lot of education here of just like, why would we do trunk-based development? Why do we want to deliver, every day as opposed to, once a month? Like, why is that even good? And so we spent a lot of time, and then just also like, how does this tool work? How does this service work? How can I integrate my bespoke team processes into this more standardized methodology, et cetera? So as I mentioned, the results we were very excited. The results were that we doubled the productivity of those pilot teams. And I didn't really mention, but those pilot teams represented about 10% of eBay's actively developed applications. So that's like, out of 4,000 engineers, we were working with about 400 of them. And as I mentioned, the deployment frequency improved 5x. So these are on these accelerate metrics. So, from twice a month to kind of twice a week or 2.5 times a week. Lead time improved 5x from 10 days to 2 days. Change failure rate also, we weren't even focusing in that area. Change failure rate improved 3x. Time to recover improved improved 3x. Again, why? Because we kept going back to the teams. What's your bottleneck now? It seems like you're taking 5 days to deploy. What would it take to make it 3 days and 2 days and 1 day? And again, so we constantly focused on, with the teams, on noticing the bottlenecks that you're having right now in your team, and then working with those teams to unblock them, either by providing a better tool from our side or giving the team some coaching about how they can, make things better themselves. And as I mentioned, we did a lot of reduction of build time and startup time. We invested in the staging environment, lots of automation around upgrades and testing and deployment. Teams streamlined their processes once they could see that they were really having an effect on their lead time. And then one of the things I'm particularly proud of, is moving from monthly releases of our iOS and Android apps to weekly releases. So the biggest skeptics for when I said, hey, we're going to release our mobile apps every 1 week, because it used to be a month. And the biggest skeptics were my mobile release team. They said, there's no way you can do that, Randy. Good luck. You're crazy. And I said, well, let's see how it goes. Let's try an experiment. So this was through 2021. So January, we were deploying monthly. We started trying bi-weekly releases, let's call April 2021. They said, that's not so bad. That seems okay. And so we tried an experiment in July. Let's try 1 weekly release. Like we were doing bi-weekly. Let's try 1 weekly release. And it went great. And they said, you know what? That thing we didn't even think we could do this year, let's start doing it right now. So we've had weekly releases. We started doing weekly releases 5 months before Randy's insane deadline that we could never meet. So that's pretty cool. And we've gotten even better since then. Okay, culture and behavior. This is super important. So one of the things is just inject a sense of excitement and fun about this work. So in that weekly team of teams meeting, everybody shared their metrics, and everybody was super excited to say, hey, we moved our lead time from 5 days to 4 days, and here's how we did it. And teams were inspiring each other in this kind of friendly, competitive way to improve. We actually had teams noticing that their kind of sister teams were getting really a lot of value out of this work, and so they forced their way into the program. Hey, we want to be part of the program, even though we didn't sign up at the beginning of the year. Great stuff. And then the developers definitely never want to go back to the old ways. In terms of collaboration, we really needed to set up a feeling that it was safe for people to say when they were blocked. So the old style kind of pathological culture was that if you complained about stuff, you certainly wouldn't get any help, but also sometimes maybe you guys aren't good at your job, and sometimes bad things would happen, or certainly people feared that bad things would happen if they complained a lot. Well, so it took a while for us to say teams, no, it's okay. If you tell us something that you're blocked by, we'll help you, and it's okay to be blocked because the metrics show it's taking you, 2 weeks to deploy something. Let's figure out why. And we started partnering with broader other teams, more broadly. So the security team, they were involved because we want to make sure that we move all the security testing, into the pipelines rather than doing it later. Accessibility, which is making the site available to all people of all abilities. Localization, which is not the whole world doesn't speak English, as you well know, so localizing to local languages, and then Sarbanes-Oxley, which is a compliance framework in the United States that's about a lot of stuff that public companies have to deal with. So we wanted to make sure that their requirements were in here too. Teams started automating their own workflows. So in the past, it was domain teams would consume tools, platform teams would produce tools, but the domain teams weren't building their own tools. Who knows why? Probably because they were never asked to. But now they were said, now the teams the teams noticed, hey, it's taking us 5 days to approve PRs. Maybe if we just did a simple tool in our team where we just reminded somebody, hey, it looks like this PR has been waiting for a while and we need an approval. So just simple tools that teams built on their own. They did a bunch of automation of performance testing that they used to do kind of manually, pressing a button manually, accessibility testing, et cetera, lots of automation. And then teams would demo these new tools and capabilities that they built themselves and inspire others and get people to be happy about it. And then the team shared a bunch of tools and learnings with each other. We've had one of the things that's been really exciting and helpful is that we've had lots of support from the executive team. So the CEO, who also returned to eBay about the same time that I did 2 years ago, anyway, I returned because of him, let's just say it that way. He constantly highlights how important this work is at company all hands, at exec meetings. We've actually presented to the board of directors, and he talks about this work externally in eBay's quarterly earnings reports. So he continually tells us this is the most important initiative at the company, so Randy, please go faster. Okay, here we go. So what we're doing in 2022 is scaling the initiative. So I mentioned we started in 2021 with 10% of teams. Now we're expanding this year to 50% of the teams. And we're actually already oversubscribed. So more teams have volunteered to be part of the work than we expected. So we're actually ahead of our goal by the end of 2022 to have influenced 50% of the teams at eBay. How are we scaling this? Because I can't multiply myself 5 times. I can't multiply my team 5 times. So we've standardized what we call, the velocity playbook, or we might say a paved path for how teams can improve. A bunch of documentation that says when you have this problem with your lead time, look at this, look at this, look at this. Here are some tools that you can use. Here are some things that other teams have had good experiences at eBay. Lots of training videos, and then links to further resources. Because we live, one of the main themes of this conference, I'm sure you've noticed, is the software supply chain and security threats to software. And one of the main mitigation techniques is just making sure your software is upgraded. You don't have really old versions of software, and that's as true at eBay as it is anywhere else. And so one of the other initiatives that I lead outside of Velocity is making sure that we're constantly upgrading the software across, again, all of our 4,500 applications and services. And the reason why I mention it is because all the velocity work that we're doing about making it easier and faster to deploy software also ends up helping on improving those security vulnerabilities. So we're kind of coming at the problem from both sides. Does it make sense? Like from the security vulnerabilities, we're asking people, hey, every one of those 4,500 applications needs to be upgraded at least once a month. And, and the velocity capabilities are the tools and the capabilities that allow you to do it. And then lastly, I mentioned a little bit about the continued improvements that we've made to the mobile apps. So we've continued to tighten that weekly release cycle. So now the cycle looks like this. It used to be monthly, where it would take most of the month to stabilize the release. There'd be a code freeze on, let's call it January 1st, and then it would take till January 21st for it to be stable and then work, and then it would take a week to roll it out to the app stores. Well, now we do the code freeze on Wednesday. We run for 24 hours. We run a bunch of automated tests. We submit to the app stores on Thursday. In Android, we get approved immediately, and in Apple, we wait for 1 day, let's say, and we start rolling it out to customers on Friday at 1%, and then we watch the metrics, et cetera, over the weekend, and then we turn it to 100% on Monday. So we call those weekly releases, but if you think about it, really we're able to release software into the app stores within 24 hours, which is pretty cool. Great. So the last thing I want to talk about is our current challenges, because we have challenges. I told you about improvements to engineering metrics, but what I didn't tell you about, because we haven't been able to measure it, is improvement in the overall outcomes of eBay. And the reason is, again, because we took that cross-sectional approach. So now what we're doing as we scale the program is work with a whole suite of teams that are building like the entire customer experience for selling, or the entire customer experience with buying, and tying this work toward better improvements to the customer experience. The initiative team ourselves, even though we've done a lot of work in standardizing this work, like we're still kind of under-resourced, and that's a challenge. A bunch of the other leadership at the company are still learning how to do this work, and so sometimes they're spending more time arguing about why their metrics look bad instead of like actually improving their practices. And then, change is hard at every company, and it's very hard to change mindset. And the statistic that I've learned recently is 81% of the transformations we're trying to do fail. 81%. of like an agile transformation or DevOps transformation or digital transformation, like whatever XYZ, fill in the blank, star transformation. 81% of them fail, only 19% succeed. So this is because like companies have a kind of immune system where they intentionally or otherwise fight change. So this is definitely one of our big challenges right now. So I think I'll stop there. I'm very open to having questions. It looks like we have a bunch of time for questions. So hopefully you've added some questions into Slido, and we can go back and forth on those. So thank you very much, and I'd love to talk more about this.
Thanks a lot, Randy. We would like to say thanks by the name of Craft, so congrats. I know you were expecting this wine because you tracked it down that you will have one, but it will be a nice spot among your presents what you got from the Craft. So have fun and drink it.
Thank you.
Yeah. And now we have like around 10 minutes for the Q&A. We have already questions on Slido, but I give you some time for upvoting because we have so many questions. So please focus on the most important ones. We will count like 10 minutes for the Q&A, but actually we are behind schedule with a few minutes. So first of all, a question is, you were doing it for 2 years. What would you do differently?
What would I do differently? Yeah, that's an excellent question. What we did initially was we went straight to the individual teams. Why? Because we wanted to prove that these things that you could read in books, would work at eBay. So go straight to the individual teams. If they're interested, we work with them and prove the value immediately. One of the things I would do differently is spend more time talking with their team's leadership about what we're trying to do and why, and educating them. I wouldn't stop working with the teams. I wouldn't only do it top down, but we started bottom up, and I would do more of a balanced approach where I would do bottom up and top down. That's one thing that I would learn.
That's cool. Okay, let's jump on the question. So how did you isolate those 10% of piloted teams from common problems in the company? For example, slow support from infra teams, too much dependencies among teams, etc.
That's a great question. And I love the specific examples because I have different answers for both of them. So one common problem that you say is slow support from infrastructure teams. Well, so I simply talk with the person who is responsible for the platform and infrastructure that the developers were working on. So that was an easy conversation. One of the reasons why I think this has been more successful than otherwise is my day job is the VP of engineering for the developer productivity. We call it something different, but like the developer platform essentially. So I could influence my teams to do all this work. So that was pretty helpful. The other part was too many dependencies among teams. Yes, none of this work solves inter-team dependencies, and that's okay. We'll solve those problems later. Again, when we did that assessment, that end-to-end value stream map in the beginning, every team was bottlenecked on software delivery, and so even without solving the inter-team dependencies problem, you can still reduce lead time from 1 month to 1 week to 1 day, and that still provides a lot of value. Like if teams are moving faster, then those dependencies are less problematic. They're still problematic, but they're less problematic if each of the teams is moving faster, if that makes any sense. Happy to answer more questions about this, but it's a great question.
Okay, let's talk about gaming the metrics. How do you prevent teams from gaming the metrics?
Yeah, sure. We've had a lot of conversation back and forth with teams about the metrics. So the first thing that is wonderful about the State of DevOps surveys and about the Accelerate book is we are not debating what the metrics are. We are not debating what to measure ourselves by, because the research shows, please read the book, as I tell my teams, read the book. Deployment frequency, lead time, change failure rate, and MTTR. These are the metrics that we are using to measure software delivery. So already that's helpful. How do we stop teams from gaming the metrics? In some sense, it depends on what they're doing, because it's hard to game deployment frequency. It's hard to game lead time. Like if you're deploying, even if you're deploying a small unit of work, that's actually what we want. Because the insight, which I didn't say, but you'll read or already know, is the reason why deployment frequency and lead time are measures that make sense is because when we deploy small units of work to the site, they're less risky and they're easier to understand, they're easier to code review, they're easier to roll out and roll back. So if people game the metrics by deploying smaller units of work, they're not gaming them at all. It's exactly the point of the metrics. And the failure rate metrics are basically not gameable because we have pretty clean ideas about what does it mean to roll back the software and how to measure bugs and stuff. So, I mean, it's a great question, and teams are always trying to figure out how they can game it, to be honest. But mostly, there's a reason why these metrics matter, and that's mostly they're like all the techniques you would use to game them are like exactly what the metrics are trying to get.
Okay, now about deployment. If you deploy multiple times a day, how and when does quality assurance happen?
All the time. All the time. As with all things, we want to make it easy. We want to deploy small units of work. We want to make it safe to deploy small units of work. So a thing that one should do is continuously test. So we keep automating and moving the testing earlier and earlier in the cycle. So we help developers test more locally. Every time a developer makes a commit, we run a suite of tests. Every time we're ready to do a deployment, we run an even broader suite of tests. So we're constantly running those tests, and we're constantly focusing on how to reduce the time that it takes to run those tests by parallelizing them, by maybe only running the tests of areas that have changed, in the software. So there's a whole bunch of techniques that we do. But the answer is all the time. If anybody's familiar with, I have a great recommendation for a resource for all of you. The very best YouTube channel I can recommend in the world is, so far, because I haven't seen them all, is Dave Farley's Continuous Delivery channel. Continuous Delivery. 100,000 people do it, so now make it 100,000 and 100 people. So one of the things he likes to say is, when should we test? He says, test all the time. Test all the time. You can imagine what I might say in that little...
The F word, I guess.
The F word, that's true. That's it. Test all the time. Okay.
Okay, I think we have like 2 or 3 more questions time.
Sure.
So guys, please upvote if you have something interesting on the table.
Yeah.
So how did you reduce PR validation time? How many approves do you need to have a valid PR?
Yeah, sure. We do paired code reviews, and I don't mean pair programming, although we do that in some areas. One person submits, another person reviews. So that's the answer to the second part of the question. How do we reduce the PR validation time? There are several ways. Number one is when Oliver is waiting on me to do a code review, just like reminding me, hey, Oliver's waiting on you, and it used to be the accepted thing in our team was maybe it might take me 3 days to get back to him, but now teams have just changed their behaviors a little bit. Like after their daily stand-up, for some teams, they say after the daily stand-up, do all the code reviews right then that that people are waiting on. Does it make sense? So like every day, at the least, nobody will wait more than 24 hours to get a PR reviewed. The other thing, obviously, if you think about it, is when we encourage smaller units of work, it's a lot faster to approve, right? If Oliver makes a 10-line code change, it's pretty quick for me to review. If Oliver makes a 1,000-line code change, it takes a long time. I actually committed that sin when I used to work at Google. I was the 1,000 person, by the way. That was pretty bad. It took my friend 2 days to review my 1,200-line code change, so I learned an important lesson there. Okay.
Let's go with a more theoretical question. What is your take on standardization vs developer freedom?
Yeah, I want both. Honestly, and they're not in conflict. So what we do is very similar to, our model is very similar to the Google and Netflix model, which is we have a paved path or a paved road. If you use the standardized development frameworks, which my team spend a lot of time building and integrating with everything, everything's going to be really easy for you. It's okay if you want to go your own way, but then you are responsible for integrating with the monitoring environment, integrating with the deployment tooling, making sure that this works and that works. And so that combination of here's a standard set of tools and frameworks and capabilities that you get for free, and there are teams whose sole job it is to make those good. That's where we start. And I would say 3/4 of our applications and services are built on those development frameworks that we maintain. I didn't say, and it doesn't matter, but we do mostly Java and then some. Goodness. I guess that.
That's
I don't know if you like Java or not like Java. Like, I'm not sure how to take that, to be honest. So we mostly program in Java, have for 20 years. So we have pretty rich stuff. And then Node we've been doing Node for about the last 5 years for mostly UI-related stuff. So, because we can be isomorphic with JavaScript on the front end and the back end. So anyway, happy to talk about those. But yeah, you can every team, the standard frameworks are available to everyone, and mostly teams choose to use them. But when they don't, they take on the full responsibility for kind of maintaining and upgrading the software.
Okay, now I cut it off because we're already over time. And thanks a lot for all your answers. A huge applause.